It was a quiet evening on a stretch of highway when Officer Daniels spotted a car speeding well above the limit. Flipping on his lights, he pulled the vehicle over, prepared for a routine traffic stop. But as he approached the driver's window, something unusual caught his eye. Sitting in the passenger seat was a boy who looked strikingly familiar. The driver, a nurse still in her scrubs, appeared flustered as she rolled down the window. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, trying to remain professional, though his gaze kept drifting to the young boy beside her. What happened next left him frozen in shock. The boy turned to look at him, and Officer Daniels felt his breath catch. The child's face, with its unmistakable resemblance, unlocked memories he wasn't prepared to confront. Who was this nurse, and why was his own son, whom he hadn't seen in years, sitting beside her? The question swirled in his mind as he struggled to keep his emotions in check. What should have been a routine stop was now anything but, and Officer Daniels was about to face a life-altering moment that would change everything he thought he knew. The nurse, startled by his long pause, glanced nervously at the boy. "Is something wrong, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. Officer Daniels cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "No, ma'am," he said, forcing himself to focus. "I just need to see your license and registration." As she fumbled through her purse, his mind raced. Could this really be his son? The boy looked to be around 8 years old, the right age. But how could he be here, in this car, with her? When she handed over her ID, Daniels quickly scanned the name. Rebecca Sanders. It didn't ring any bells. He glanced at the boy again. "What's your name, buddy?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Ethan," the boy said softly, his wide eyes meeting Daniels. The officer felt a lump in his throat. That name. He hadn't heard it in years, not since the day his ex-wife left and took their son with her. Rebecca noticed his expression and tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "Is something wrong?" she asked again, this time more firmly. Daniels hesitated, his heart pounding. How was this possible? And why was Ethan here, with this woman? There were too many questions and no clear answers yet. Daniels handed the ID back, trying to appear unaffected. "Everything checks out, ma'am," he said, though his mind was far from calm. Rebecca's guarded expression told him she wasn't just nervous about the speeding ticket. Something else was going on. "I'm sorry for speeding," Rebecca said quickly. I had to get Ethan home." She glanced at the boy, her hand briefly touching his knee, as if reassuring him. The gesture felt intimate, protective, and it only deepened Daniel's confusion. He looked at Ethan again, searching for more clues in the child's face. The resemblance was undeniable. The same dark eyes, the same crooked smile he used to see in old photographs. Memories of bedtime stories and tiny footsteps running through the house flashed in his mind, mixing with the ache of years spent wondering if he'd ever see his son again. "Home," Daniels repeated, his voice tight. "Where's home for you, too?" Rebecca hesitated, and Daniels could feel her weighing her response. "We're just passing through," she said vaguely. "It's been a long day." The cryptic answer only raised more questions. Why was she avoiding specifics? Was she hiding something? Daniels knew he couldn't let this go, not without understanding how his son ended up here, with her. Daniels took a slow breath, his professional demeanor barely holding under the weight of his emotions. "Where are you coming from?" he asked, his tone steady but probing. Rebecca glanced at Ethan again, her hesitation louder than any answer she could give. "A friend's place," she replied, too quickly. Daniels didn't buy it. He shifted his gaze to Ethan, whose small hands were fidgeting with a toy car in his lap. "Ethan, do you remember me?" he asked gently, leaning slightly closer. The boy froze, his wide eyes darting to Rebecca, searching for her approval or permission to speak. Rebecca's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Officer, is this necessary?" she said, her voice tense. "Necessary," Daniels repeated, his own voice rising slightly. "I think it is, considering." He stopped himself, realizing he was on the verge of losing control. Rebecca's reaction only deepened his suspicion. "What's going on here?" he finally asked, his voice low but firm. "Why is he with you?" Rebecca's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. The silence between them was deafening. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his voice breaking it. "Mom, I'm scared." "Mom." The word hit Daniels like a punch to the gut. This woman, whoever she was, had been raising his son. The realization lit a fire in him, but he still didn't have the answers he desperately needed. Why had Ethan been taken from him? And why was Rebecca acting like she had something to hide? Daniels felt his chest tighten as Ethan's words echoed in his mind. "Mom, how could she be his mother?" Before he could say anything, Rebecca finally spoke, her voice shaky but determined. "Officer Daniels, I don't think this is the time or place for a personal conversation. Please, can we just go?" Her words only fueled his suspicions. "Not until I get some answers," he said, stepping back slightly but keeping his eyes locked on her. "You owe me that much." Rebecca's face hardened, and for a moment, she looked more tired than afraid. "You don't understand," she said, her voice dropping. "I was trying to protect him." "Protect him?" Daniels repeated, his frustration bubbling over. "From what? From me?" Ethan's eyes welled up, his small voice trembling. "Mom, please don't fight." The sight of his son's tears almost broke Daniels, but something in Rebecca's expression stopped him cold. It wasn't fear, it was guilt. She looked like someone carrying a secret far too heavy to bear. Rebecca exhaled sharply, her hand trembling as she wiped her face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she muttered, almost to herself. Before Daniels could press her further, the sound of a phone ringing broke the tension. Rebecca fumbled to silence it, but not before Daniels caught a glimpse of the caller ID. Unknown. Her panic was immediate. "Who's calling you?" Daniels demanded, his instincts on high alert. Rebecca hesitated, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. "It's none of your business," she snapped, but her voice cracked, betraying her. Daniels leaned closer, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "If Ethan is in danger, you need to tell me. Now." Rebecca glanced back at Ethan, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. "You don't know who's after us," she whispered. Daniels froze, the weight of her words crashing down on him. "After us?" Suddenly, this wasn't just about a speeding ticket or a long-lost son. Something much bigger was at play, and Ethan was caught in the middle of it. Rebecca's words hung in the air, thick with tension. Daniels felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Who's after you?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Rebecca's eyes darted to Ethan, then back to Daniels. "I don't have time to explain everything," she said hurriedly. But Ethan, he wasn't safe where he was. "I did what I had to do to protect him." Daniel's heart raced, torn between the need for answers and the growing fear for his son. Protect him from what? From who? Before she could respond, the sound of tires screeching in the distance made all three of them freeze. Rebecca's face went pale. "They found us," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniels instinctively placed his hand on his holster, scanning the road behind them. A black SUV was speeding toward them, its headlights cutting through the dusk like a warning. "Get Ethan out of here," Rebecca said suddenly, her voice urgent. "What? No," Daniels shot back. Rebecca grabbed his arm, her eyes desperate. "You don't understand. They'll hurt him to get to me. Please take him and go." The SUV came to a screeching halt a few feet away, and two men stepped out, their dark suits and cold expressions making it clear this wasn't random. Daniel stepped in front of Rebecca and Ethan, his hand steady on his weapon. "Stay in the car," he ordered, his voice sharp. The men didn't hesitate. "We're here for her," one of them said, his voice calm but menacing. Daniel stood his ground. "Not on my watch." Rebecca pulled Ethan close, whispering something into his ear. Daniels caught only a fragment. "Trust him." The tension snapped like a rubber band. One of the men reached for something in his jacket, but Daniels was faster. "Police, don't move," he barked, his weapon drawn. The men hesitated, clearly re-evaluating their plan. Sirens suddenly wailed in the distance. "Back up." Daniels hadn't called it, but Rebecca's phone must have. The men exchanged glances, then retreated to their SUV. "This isn't over," one of them warned before speeding off. Rebecca slumped in the seat, visibly shaking. Daniels turned to her, his voice softer now. "Start talking. Who are they, and why is my son involved?" Tears streamed down her face. "They're part of a group, people I used to work for. I found out something I wasn't supposed to, and they're trying to silence me." Ethan wasn't safe with them around. Daniels looked at his son, who clung to Rebecca with wide, frightened eyes. The anger he'd felt earlier was replaced with something else, understanding. But just as he thought he had the full picture, Rebecca dropped one last bombshell. "Ethan doesn't just look like you," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's your son and mine." Daniels froze, his mind reeling. He stared at her, then at Ethan. The truth hit him like a tidal wave. The boy wasn't just his son from the past. He was the child of a secret he never knew existed. Daniel stared at Rebecca, struggling to process her words. Ethan looked up at him, his small face filled with a mix of fear and hope. For a moment, everything else faded, the threats, the chaos, even the sirens in the distance. All that mattered was the boy standing between them. "You're both coming with me," Daniel said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Rebecca hesitated but nodded, knowing they had no other choice. As they drove to the station, Rebecca finally opened up. She explained how she had met Daniels years ago during a brief but meaningful connection. When she discovered she was pregnant, her circumstances, and fear, kept her from reaching out. But when her involvement with the dangerous group unraveled, she realized Ethan was no longer safe. That's when she decided to run, unknowingly crossing paths with Daniels in the process. At the station, Daniels arranged for their protection while investigators began looking into the men who had pursued them. Rebecca's cooperation turned the tide, exposing the group and ensuring Ethan's safety. In the days that followed, Daniels and Ethan began rebuilding their bond, taking small but meaningful steps. For the first time in years, Daniels felt whole again. Ethan was finally where he belonged, home.